Welcome back, WNST, Taos, Baltimore, and Baltimore Positive. I would put the Oriole Park thing behind me on the YouTube thing, and I would say that Luke Jones sometimes is in Owings Mills. He ain't Owings Mills. You want Luke Jones, go to Jersey, find him up on a beach, getting fat on pizza, probably drinking beer. At least I hope so. Hopefully not watching last place baseball. Luke, there's times you need a vacation, and there's times you need a vacation from baseball and a vacation from the vacation. I've been vacationing from the Orioles for quite some time, and I do apologize. I was supposed to make it down to the Bowie Bay Sox game. Apparently, Grayson Rodriguez did just fine without us on Saturday night. We were a little overtaxed and overworked on Saturday doing some WNST responsibilities that we did not make it. But I know you've been watching a lot of baseball. And a lot of folks are going away on baseball. There's no football right now. You're doing some beach time. I'm doing some crab cake time with County Executive Barry Glassman up in Bel Air at Barrett's this week. And we're going to be with Stuart Pittman next week having a crab cake down in Anne Arundel County. But I thought about our segment today, dude, and I got like a little bit sad on it because I started thinking about like June 20-something. It's July 4th. Heritage Fair, got Crack the Sky on the show this week. Steve Whiteman's on. They're opening Merriweather for free on Friday nights. I'm going down with Pica, sitting on the lawn, shaking my ass with Stevie Whiteman, who promises I can't find a good crab cake in Hagerstown. I'm going to try to, I'm going to go against the grain and try to figure that out. But the baseball thing's been such a part of my life. And, watching these games and Buffalo over the weekend, dude, and thinking like a couple of weeks ago, and I wasn't even joking with you. I thought, let's go to Buffalo and see some minor league baseball or major league baseball in a minor league park. And nothing looked like it was fun. I mean, I saw some Oriole fans up there. Maybe they drove down from Rochester from the 1980s. But this is – I don't even want to do these segments and come on here and be an a-hole. But, like, this is terrible. This is, God bless you for watching it, but I can't do it, dude.
Yeah, it's tough. I'm not going to sit here and sugarcoat it. I mean, they're 9-38 since the John Means no-hitter as they wrapped up the weekend in in Buffalo facing the Toronto Blue Jays. And keep in mind, over that stretch, they had a stretch in early June where they won 5 of 6. So they'd lost 38 of 47 post John Means no-hitter, and there's a stretch of 5 wins in 6 games in the midst of that. So what does that tell you? Some long losing streaks.
What is that then? 2-17 and 1 and like what does that equate to?
Right. I mean but that's what I'm talking about. I mean, through Sunday they had lost 16 of their last 18. I mean, it's miserable. It's absolutely miserable, and I'm not going to sit here and sugarcoat that. There are a few positives you can pull out of it. Cedric Mullins made it through phase 1 as far as this phased All-Star voting. I think he's probably not going to be voted a starter. I think we know that, but I think there's a really good chance that he will be in the All-Star game. The news came over the weekend. Trey Mancini looks like he's going to be in the home run derby. That'll be a great story. That'll be fun. Awesome for him. Awesome for Orioles fans to be able to watch that. Ryan Mountcastle's had a great June. That's at least one other young guy you can point to and say, hey, after a really rough April, he's really hit well. And in June, he's been fantastic. Beyond that, there's not a whole lot to be positive about. And we know about John Means. We know Bruce Zimmerman's on the shelf. Looks like those guys are going to be out until the All-Star break. Freddie Galvis goes down over the weekend, and not that I thought Freddie Galvis was going to fetch them anything of real consequence at the trade deadline, but I thought there was a chance they could move him and maybe you get a couple lottery tickets. But he hurts the quad. Looks like he's going to be out a month or two. So I would think the odds of being able to move him.
Dude, when I got that text, I thought, come on, man.
Right. And again, I don't want to inflate what Freddie Galvis has been. He's been fine, but he's someone who
made a few nice plays.
Yeah, but I think he's someone that if you're a team that needs some middle infield depth, whether you're talking about a starter or just a guy who can play short or second base, on a contending club, you can do worse than him. And I'm guessing it would have been an Andrew Kashner-like return as far as maybe a Dominican Summer League lottery tickets or something like that, which, hey, that's fine. That's okay to do that. But
that's what I need. I need a Dominican summer lottery ticket. That's what I need. Or a Jamaican or an Aruban or a Barbadian or I don't know.
Yes. There you go. If it includes a trip there, I'm in.
Hey, dude, at
But
least Chicken Palooza's going on this month. We got something going on at Rofo. That's all I
no
can say.
question, no question about it. But you just look at the negatives beyond what I just mentioned with the injuries. I mean, we've talked about, and I wrote about this at BaltimorePositive.com late last week as the Orioles wrapped up their most recent homestand. Anthony Santander hurt, playing through it, not performing at a very high level. Same with Austin Hayes. And the one thing we talked about before the season, if there was one strength on this ball club, it was the outfield, right? And that was when we thought Cedric Mullins, we were debating whether he was a starting center fielder or a fourth outfielder, ironically. And now he's become an all-star. But the rest of the group hasn't done very well. And that's been disappointing because that was kind of the one group on the major league roster where you thought, okay, that should be a strength. So you have that. And then for me, what I think has become so painfully obvious as far as, in my mind at this point, now that Mountcastle's hitting and performing at a much higher level, I look at Dean Kramer and Keegan Aiken, and let's be very clear. These guys were never Grayson Rodriguez and DL Hall in terms of the minor league prospect pecking order. These weren't top 100 guys around baseball, but these were guys that have been top 10 guys in the Orioles system and guys who have quite a bit of minor league experience. We're not talking about someone that was at Single A and Rush. We're not talking about Tyler Wells, who's a Rule 5
Machado's
pick.
been gone 3 years now, right? So like Kramer, anytime
Right.
the name comes up, it harkens back to what time is it?
Yeah.
And he's had a major league uniform on, and it's just not good enough.
It's been
below the bar, as John Harbaugh would say, right?
It's been brutal. And let's be clear, I'm not saying I had expectations that these guys would have 3.25 ERAs right now, but is it too much to ask that those two could give you what, say, Bruce Zimmerman has given them, which is, he has a 4.8 ERA. It hasn't been anything special, but it's at least been functional. It's been competitive. It's keeping you in games. It's not completely compromising your bullpen every time you go out there. In the case of Dean Kramer last Thursday night, where he retires one batter. I mean, I
couldn't believe it, dude. I mean, we watched Jeopardy in my house, okay? Because we're smart around here, and I like to compete a little bit, I don't know if you know this or not, but I'm competitive, Luke.
A little bit.
Yeah, and 7:30, I put it on at 6-0, and it's the first inning, and I'm like, come on, man. I don't know what I missed here, and this is on the back end of 9-0,
right,
13-0, right? Like literally. What are we doing? And I want to say, what are we doing? What are they doing? Luke, I want to vomit a little bit and be the old guy. I know it's hard for me to play this role of the old guy, get off my lawn thing, but I'm going to try to play that right now. Back in my era, when a ball club was going to lose 100 games, and, I had Bill Madden on recently talking about Tom Seaver. We're talking about how bad the late 70s Mets were. And, that's my wheelhouse of Mel Allen and This Week in Baseball, and you'd see Kuzman and Matlock and Seaver playing out the string or whatever it was. And then the Seavers wound up on television as Growing Pains, different show, if I remember that. But in that era, you'd bring Dave Kingman over at 37 to try to at least hit a couple of home runs. You'd try to find some, Jake Dorn from the California Penal League, and Major League made a whole movie on the guy Vagisil in the baseball who was 38, the guy with the bad knees in his 30s playing out the string and trying hard. I think the hardest part in the modern era for them or for the Diamondbacks or for any of these teams that are trying to lose, because look, man, I'm not on the radio to be a dick, but they're trying to get the number 1 draft pick now. That's what they're trying to do. There is no other organizational play on this. And your brother-in-law, before he was your brother-in-law, back when he was still decision-making and the Sixers were deciding how bad they were going to be to try to be good and how that blew up Howard Eskin in Philadelphia. Nobody blows that up around here. We've just sort of accepted that, like, how bad are they going to be? As nasty as they want to be. And there's no Chris Davis they're going to bring in and give him some at-bats or another Freddie Galvis in the pipeline or whatever. I don't know who's getting these at-bats, dude. I mean, like, especially when they're bad to begin with. They don't mind being bad. They're not bringing any. I mean, Rutschman can hit 420 in Bowie, and they're not bringing him up. Not in this mess, 30 games under 500. It's the way the game's structured now as to they really don't want me watching. I remember back when the Astros stunk, they had a 0.0 as a Blue Tarski television rating in Houston, Texas. Not so good for Toyota and Southwest Airlines or Chick-fil-A, but for me not watching them, I'm not even convinced that they don't mind that I'm not watching them, because when they're losing 13-0 and 9-0, they probably don't want me watching them, and they probably prefer that I'm out fly fishing than sitting here on a daily basis and talking about how awful it is. Not just it, but the broadcast. Like, it is not worth my time, and it's just not, and that's disgraceful. And I sit here, I fight with Moeller. He's out of his mind, and I'll tell him, if you see Moeller, tell him he's out of his mind about baseball. But like, to think that this hasn't damaged the city or been a part of it, like when I live here and selling my condo and seeing nobody here, and the season's over, like putting it on TV on nights when Means isn't pitching, like they had that going for him 60 days ago, that like, hey, there's something to watch here with this. And the Mancini All-Star Game thing, that's great. I'll be watching. I'm an Oriole guy. I'm a Mancini guy. I'm a cancer survivor guy. I hope he goes and plays for the Padres or something and wins, goes somewhere. But I would just say, for where it is right now, I haven't had a rant in a while. But when you're losing 13-0 and 9-0, and then behind it all, the real goal is to lose, and there is no help. I wonder what it looks like in August and September, because it ain't going to look like Adley Rutschman and DL Hall and Grayson Rodriguez.
Yeah, I mean, well, it's not going to look like those guys. I mean, do you see Rutschman in September? We'll see. But I think what makes this so much more difficult is, there's a couple things at work here. First of all, there's the juxtaposition of the end of the Dan Duquette, Buck Showalter era meeting and clashing with Mike Elias, Sig Mejdal and company. We know very much, because we talked about it for the better part of a good year and a half or so, that the previous era held on for way too long, absolutely way too long, to the point where it absolutely crashed and burned to a historic level in 2018. And we know that because they bested or worsted the 2000 or the 1988 Orioles in terms of worst club in franchise history. So they hit rock bottom in a way that was not tanking. It was, they were holding on way too long. They continued going toward the cliff when they should have slammed on the brakes and let some stuff out of the car at that point. And we knew that, and we kind of talked about that post 2016 a little bit. We certainly talked about it during 2017 in that offseason that followed. So you have that. They got to a point where they did truly have no choice but to rebuild at that point in time. However, now you get into a time period where we're a couple years into this thing at this point, where they, in 2019, there was a lot of talk then that they were deliberately tanking. And look, they weren't doing anything to really meaningfully improve their odds of winning, but they were so bad and such at scorched earth at that point in time with where their roster was post 2018 that you kind of understood it. But now you get into this time period where, as much as I have talked about the fact that I agree philosophically with not going circa 2004 and sign some version of Miguel Tejada and Javi Lopez and Rafael Palmeiro and Sidney Ponson, and think that if everything goes absolutely perfectly and you catch lightning in a bottle, that you could maybe win 87 games and be in the second wild card chase. I wouldn't condone that. And I think that would be very poor, strategically speaking, to do that. However, on the opposite end of the spectrum, you have the idea of where they basically are right now, which is you're not putting anything into it other than, if you look at the offseason, okay, they brought in Freddie Galvis for 1 year, $1.5 million. And they did it with Jose Iglesias the year before, and it's actually worked out okay. They've, considering what they wanted out of those guys, they kind of got it. But then you look on the pitching side, and I already mentioned the outfield looked like a strength on paper. That hasn't worked out. I can't fault them for not adding another outfielder, because I thought this outfield would be much better than it's been. And Cedric Mullins has been fantastic, and everyone else has been disappointing because of injuries or performance. But you look at the starting rotation. We know they moved Alex Cobb. They were able to save money in the process of doing that, and they got J.M. Jones, who I think we are going to see at some point here in the very near future. probably playing second base, if not second base, playing in the outfield. And I think he's a bat that's interesting. So that trade in isolation, I did not mind. However, when you trade Alex Cobb, and let's be clear, I wasn't going to make the assumption that Alex Cobb was going to throw 200 innings either, but a veteran arm, a guy that you assume would give you some functional length and give you some competitive outings, and maybe you could move him at the trade deadline come the end of July. They move him in the offseason. And what do they do in terms of veteran additions with their starting pitching? Matt Harvey, a complete reclamation project, a guy who's been absolutely awful over the last couple of years. And if you're telling me you're bringing him in as, like if you think back to last year, they had Cobb in the mix still. They brought in Wade LeBlanc. They brought in Tommy Malone, who they ended up trading, if you recall, before the deadline last year, and got a couple maybes out of it. But when it's Matt Harvey, and then you look at the rest of the rotation, and you're going to fill it out with 3 rookies, and we're not talking Grayson Rodriguez, DL Hall type rookies, but 3 rookies that are more okay, maybe top 10, top 15 in the system, which is where Kramer and Aiken were. Zimmerman a little bit lower on the list, even though he's ended up outperforming them. How you don't at least add another veteran pitcher or 2 in that mix. And, it was Felix Hernandez, again, another guy that was kind of in that Matt Harvey ilk where he didn't even pitch last year. He opted out, which, certainly someone you couldn't count on that you were going to say, oh yeah, he's definitely going to give you 25 starts, and maybe you'll trade him at the deadline, or he'll give you a sub-5 ERA, but he's at least going to give you innings. He's at least going to give you 5 or 6 innings.
Well, you know what, dude? The fact that I've beaten them up about this, they were kicking around Felix Hernandez, and they've kicked around Matt Harvey. So they brought in their Doug Drabeck, Kevin Millwood.
It needed to be a little. It needed to be a little better than that. And again, I'm not talking
when they've
about
given pitchers money, dude, over 20 years, it's Ubaldo Jimenez.
Sure.
It's guys that nobody else. They have never signed. I mean, since Jimmy Key, you know what I mean? Like this
Sure.
isn't a place, not just organizationally and how effed up Angelos is and how effed up the American League East is, the ballpark. And Palmer talks about it every night. Palmer cries that story. Palmer wouldn't sign here. Nobody would sign here to pitch. Certainly not in the state of the organization, but I mean the state of the ballpark and the humidity here in the summer.
Sure. No, I understand that, but it would have been so much more beneficial to them. And let's be clear, we're not talking about decisions here that make this team go from where they are right now, which is 30 below 500, to we're talking about maybe they'd be 20 below 500, which is still last place.
Yeah, I mean,
but my point is, from a functionality standpoint, from a getting through 162 game standpoint, from a standpoint of, hey, I think we forget about it now, but at the time, Andrew Kastner pitched pretty well in 2019, to the point where they traded him to the Red Sox, and the Red Sox wanted him. Now, it wasn't a earth-shattering trade. It was a couple younger international talents, and we haven't heard anything from them since. It doesn't mean that they won't blossom at some point in time. But the point was, there was a time, and it's hard to believe now because you forget about it 2 years later, but in May and June of 2019, Andrew Kastner was actually kind of fun to watch, and he pitched well, and that changeup for him really turned into something. The point of that is not to have any kind of longing for the days of Andrew Kastner. The point is, they certainly could have brought in a couple other veteran pitchers to stabilize this rotation a little bit.
They cost real money.
Well,
I mean, and that's the point. Like, they couldn't buy top shelf pitching to begin with, so they paid top shelf prices for Ubaldo Jimenez to get a guy that can get 6 innings, who's 32 years old. It either looks like Matt Harvey or something awful like that. I don't know what it looks like. Those guys get paid real money. I mean, mediocre pitching makes $12 million a year.
Right.
These days, right.
And let's be very clear. I'm not.
And a mediocre pitcher wouldn't help them.
Mediocre pitching would help them right now. That's the problem. I would challenge.
It would help them smell better, but it wouldn't help them win better. To your point, they'd be 20 games under.
But this, again, this is not really about winning. This is about even just getting through the season, and it not winning in a historically embarrassing fashion, I guess, is my point here. But so much of this is also the trickle-down effect of how does this impact the rest of your roster? The Orioles bullpen was pretty good the first 6 weeks of the season. What has happened since then? Now, Did a couple guys come back to earth? Did everyone figure out the dead fish for Cesar Valdez, for example? Yeah, quite possibly. So there was some of that, but do I think some guys maybe got a little overworked too quickly, and then it's pittered out
Well, to
since
your
then?
point, if you had 5 Bruce Zimmermans that at least get you to 8:30 every night, you know what I
Right,
mean?
right, and
Just
there
give me.
is that, and it is difficult because I am someone that has looked at this from a long-term view, from a process view, and I do so, even I'm guilty of losing sight sometimes of the entertainment aspect of this. And at the end of the day, though, it's an entertainment-driven industry, and they're not trying to win at the major league level. And but the problem is, if it's so far below the bar, you know, I picked this team to lose 95 games
Dude,
this
if
year.
it's
It's not
so
like I
far
was being
below the
optimistic.
bar, you know what happens? We bitch about it for the next 90 days, well, not 90, 30
No, I would
days
say
till
that I would.
football starts, and then they get the number 1 draft pick, and then we all run to Aberdeen because we
Yeah,
got the next, because that's the business they're in at this point, dude.
right.
They're not in the business of pimping the number 2 pick.
Sure.
They're in the business of pimping the number 1 pick.
Sure, and that's also where we go back and forth as far as those that are thinking about this in a much more traditional way in terms of they're 30 games below 500. They're terrible. I want to see them win games. Whereas then you do have the opposite end of the spectrum where people are like, I want them to lose every game. Is
You
there?
want them to lose every night in an entertaining 4-3 ball
Yeah.
game? Is that what you want?
Well,
where it's
no,
tied
no.
and they put somebody on second base?
No,
in the
I'm
10th
saying
inning? I mean,
I'm saying people that are saying they want them to lose and they don't care that they're even losing 13-0 and embarrassing themselves every single night. So there's this, we tend to think of this as an either or. There are degrees of rebuilding and there are things you can do. And I talked about this 2 off seasons ago when I thought it was ridiculous that you dumped Jonathan VR, even though you didn't have a second baseman of the future ready, because you were worried about saving a few $1,000,000, even though your payroll's at the bottom of the barrel in Major League Baseball at this point. I mean, you're right in the bottom 5 in payroll. I can't remember what it is off the top of my head at last I looked, but it's right there at the bottom. And Jonathan VR was not a guy that was going to transform the Orioles into a third place team. They're still going to be a last place and terrible team, but Jonathan VR was fun to watch a couple years ago. So it's kind of like that sense of you can still rebuild, you can still even tank to a degree, let's say, without it having to be something that is so utterly miserable to watch in the process. And that's where I think, especially on the pitching side, and I guess we could say the infield now. I mean, they signed Maikel Franco. He's been poor. I can't say I'm shocked at that outcome. I thought he'd be a little bit better, but he was at least a veteran placeholder type. Look at second base. I mean, they acquired Yolmer Sanchez from the Chicago White Sox in the offseason, and he was so brutally bad in spring training that they waived him. And they played utility guys at second base. Pat Valaika and Stevie Wilkerson are utility guys. They had Rio Ruiz, who was a third baseman, playing second base. So
had great hair last year.
But there's an example where you look at that and say, did it really need to be that bad? Did it truly need to be that bad? Or could you still acquire or could you still achieve your long-term goal by having Hanser Alberto still there? And
I'm watching this, and for anybody who is only listening in the car, I really want you to watch the video of Luke Jones make this case with a "Who's on First" shirt.
Well, I felt like it was appropriate.
Baltimore Negro League hat to wish for a different franchise here that looks like the Boston Braves.
There are many nights I wish I was. I feel like I'm watching an Albert and Costello routine, but it's not nearly as funny.
Surprised you're not more pissed off about it. I'm pissed off and I'm not even watching.
But again,
I'm really pissed off that Trotz lost the other night and screwed my whole week up. But you know what's happened? And I've talked to everybody about this, and I've said it a lot on the radio. I haven't said it to you. My wife's turned into like this huge sports fan. They're like, seriously, like I don't put soccer on, but the Euro's on. Euro's been on since my wife discovered that soccer's being played. It sounds like I need a Vuvuzela up here every afternoon, And when I said to her, and this is like, honest to God, I said to her, we're watching a lot of soccer around here. Like, it's a Sunday afternoon, She got the Dutch on playing soccer. She got the Portuguese on playing soccer. And she's like, baseball's not worth it, and I'm like, Oh, right. You're making a great point as to why my Bostonian wife and Baltimorean Aparicio would be sitting here on a Sunday afternoon, not watching the Red Sox or the Orioles and watching the Dutch play soccer, not well, I might add,
Yeah, and let me be very clear. It's not nearly as much about the losing in its totality. It's much more about looking at some of the young pieces or potential pieces, let's say, because some of them are not looking like pieces at this point, that you thought had a chance, and in some cases a good chance, to be productive this season. Look, there are scenarios where even if Dean Kramer and Keegan Aiken are pitching much better than they are, that the Orioles are still very much in last place and still very bad and still embarrassing on many nights. There are scenarios where if Anthony Santander and Austin Hayes could stay on the field and healthy more consistently, and Santander was hitting like he did last season, for example, where, by the way, I think would have been an interesting trade chip if that were the case. But at the same time, Austin Hayes hasn't hit. DJ Stewart's had a ton of opportunities, and I think it's become apparent at this point that he's not part of the future. Not that I necessarily was thinking he would be, but it's the young guys that I thought had opportunities to make really positive contributions and make strides this year at the major league level that haven't done it. That's really disappointing. I mean, Mullins has been phenomenal. Ryan Mountcastle has been very good since the month of April, and he's even drawn some walks here of late, which makes guys like me happy who have been banging the table about him needing to show more plate discipline. But it's a really short list. And Mancini's been a phenomenal human interest story. We'll see what happens with him come trade deadline. I think you need to move him. And I know a lot of fans aren't going to want to hear that, but I do think that's where it is. And I think that probably privately might be what he wants at this point in time. I mean, he's going to be 30 years old in March. This isn't, we think of him as being younger, but he's not. I mean, he's getting to the point where, 30 something first baseman. The Orioles have been there, done that in recent history. That doesn't always age very well. So I don't think Trey Mancini is the right guy to even extend right now. And I say that as someone who loves Trey Mancini, but I think
whoa. We just spent 35 minutes here trying to get the lineup better. You're trying to get rid of the only guy that can hit the ball.
Do you really want to re-sign a 30-something first baseman?
I'm not making that case. I'm just saying if he's not in the lineup, what does it look like next year? You'd say, well, Rutschman will be here next year. Okay, if they're going to start his clock, somebody's got to play. To the beginning of the whole conversation is someone has to go out and play the games and hit the baseball and chase the baseball. And on those nights when they're losing 13-0 and bringing in outfielders to pitch, let me
rephrase what I said about Trey Mancini. I would certainly approach him and have a conversation, and I would see what he wants. First of all, what do you want, Trey? I mean, are you so in love with Baltimore and you appreciate how the organization treated you through the chemotherapy, and you felt like they stood by you, and you love the city, all that?
What is that then? Is that a 3-year, $60 million?
And that's my point. That?
Is he a $20 million ball player? What is he?
No, I don't think he's a $20 million ball player. Now, again, all it takes is one club, as we saw with the Orioles with Chris Davis 6 years ago or 5 years ago, however long it was. Feels like a decade ago at this point. But I think 3 years to me would be kind of the appropriate length. What would that be? 3 years, somewhere in the neighborhood of 51 million, something like that. I'd be open to something along those lines.
Would somebody else give him that deal if he hits the market? I think he's going to get 3 for 51.
I think so. And somebody that's
fair enough. Then he'll hit the market and he'll be, and that'll
right. So, but I guess my point is, let me be clear about this. I'm not anti keeping Trey Mancini around. I'm anti overpaying to do it. I'm anti giving him 5 years, $105 million.
Would you be pro giving him 55 so he would stay with a loser in the thought that in the third year we'll all be here and that'll be the fun year where we have a good time? But meanwhile, you're on the warehouse next year, meet this Rutschman kid, and then the next year we'll be like scrambling to get there, and maybe we'll sign somebody to pitch or play here or something. We're going to have a new deal in Baltimore, and we're going to have a new 25-year lease, and we're going to invest. And there's no relationship with John Angelos or the future or the city or tying things to whose face is going to be on the warehouse. John's trying to figure out what to do with the franchise while his old man's eating pudding. Like literally, that's where they are. There is no deep thought here of like where the franchise is going to be, other than when Don Moeller says, Mike Elias, he's going to win and he's running everything. We're going to win. We're going to win. Okay, fine. What are we going to do between now and when we're going to win? When Trey Mancini asks what's going on, when every agent in baseball asks what's going on, what is the path between here and there? The fans certainly don't know. The business community doesn't know. The state of Maryland doesn't know because they don't even have a deal. So then you say Trey Mancini's your best asset at this point. I mean, that's Rutschman. I hear that. But as far as a major league player for next year, if you think they suck now, wait till you see them without Mancini getting 480 at bats next year, right?
Well, and you just laid out the scenario, and let's be very clear about this. It's not my money, so I'm talking in terms of I'm not signing Trey Mancini into his age 35 season, age 36 season, because we've seen that with Chris Davis, how that can work out. And I'm not saying Trey Mancini would be nearly as bad as Chris Davis at that point, but let's face it, he's not fast. He's not particularly great defensively. There's a hit tool there, and that hit tool generally ages, into your 30s. Not quite yet, but not that long from now. So, but you just said it.
Unless you're Julio Frank.
If you're the organization and you say, you know what, we do value Trey a little bit differently than other teams in baseball would right now. And that's not to say other teams wouldn't value him, but we feel
want him on the side of the warehouse.
We feel he could be worth X amount of extra money over the next 2 years to bridge the gap to 2023 when Grayson Rodriguez, Adley Rutschman, DL Hall, Yusniel Diaz, go down the list.
Because we have
Kyle
to have
Bradish.
At least one major leaguer on our major league ball.
But at this point in time, Cedric Mullins is going to be an all-star, or if he's not, it's going to be a darn shame because he's been the best center fielder in baseball to this point in the season. I'm not saying he is overall. I mean, that's still Mike Trout and, looks some other guys, but in 2021, he's been that good. Ryan Mountcastle has been excellent since May. Now, again, he still has his warts and you still wonder about him long-term defensively, but he's a first base DH type. So I guess you do point to Mountcastle if you're looking at the argument for moving on from Mancini. Mountcastle then can settle into first base permanently. He can DH a little bit, and you still have the DH to be flexible for other guys that that are a little banged up, but you want to keep them in the lineup. So there is that argument there from a baseball standpoint, day-to-day standpoint. But to your point, of course, Trey Mancini is the most popular Oriole and is adored in this community, and would be if you re-signed him to a 3-year deal, if he were amenable to that.
Take the season ticket holders at the end of the year.
Sure.
Come back next year.
And let me
if people are buying season tickets at this point.
Well, and that's
it's Stockholm syndrome at this point, and I go through this when Moeller and I argue about it because it's like there's nothing I'm going to say, there's nothing they're going to do to me or you that's going to keep you away from going if you're still going at this
right.
point.
And that it's funny because I recently was having a conversation in the press box during the last homestand with just another member of the media, and we were just talking about kind of the big picture sense and.
Yeah, how bad can this be to chase you away? What would it take to make you really leave?
But the argument was Trey Mancini's here right now, and look at the crowds every night. And I'm not saying. Look, there are still a lot of factors. I mean, Fenway Park's not selling out every night right now. I mean, they're
selling tickets as much as it is about being a professional organization and looking like.
Well, but this is also where but they're not. But you wanted them to rebuild though. We talked about this in 2000, and this is where I will take a little exception where there isn't a one or the other thing here. Me saying that it's embarrassing to watch every night is not me saying they should be trying to contend right now because they don't have the foundation to try to do that right now. You would get back to the same lousy, dumbass 2007 type payroll and roster that they were.
Ubaldo Jimenez, because that's all you can do to try. That's what trying looks like when that's the best you can do, literally. Because Max Scherzer ain't coming here, and you can't grow DL Hall, right?
Yeah, but you're giving me the two opposite extremes though. There are pitchers they could have signed or found this offseason to try to be a little more functional at the major league level.
I mean, they would only get the 5th pick in the draft, not the 1st.
Well, and that's kind of where we get back to this and say, do you have to have the number 1 overall pick? Is that truly the only way you're going to contend? And that's where we kind of get into this. And this was talked about. You mentioned the Philadelphia 76ers with the process, and people can debate how that looked, as they're probably going to trade Ben Simmons at some point in time here, but that's neither here nor there.
He shot the ball yet?
But there is that thought that does it have to be this bad? Do you have to? Because here's a perfect example, and we haven't gotten into this recently, but they had the number 2 overall pick last year, and they ended up drafting Heston Kjerstad, who was under slot. Now, I'm fine with that strategy in the sense that they then went over slot to sign some better picks in the 3rd, 4th, and 5th round that they might not have been able to otherwise. So it wasn't even a matter of being cheap with that pick, but it is a matter of, do you really need 1-1 or 1-2 overall if you're going to do stuff like that
you don't
anyway?
Even take the second best player.
Right, exactly. Can't you do that? Couldn't you have done the same thing and you get the 6th overall pick? So it'll be interesting. We haven't talked much about the draft, and remember, the draft is All-Star weekend now, so it's later. But at 5th overall, do they go under slot again?
Putting some sort of combine on video the other day.
Yeah, very, very interesting.
I mean, like I have no idea. Marty Conway and I got together last week just trying to figure out what they are doing. Period. What they're doing. I'll
say this, I'll actually cite Marty Conway mentioning this. There is still a thirst for baseball out there. I'm not saying it's Major League Baseball and how they conduct themselves and what their prices are, or what harebrained rules, or trying to make it up as you go along with suddenly going to enforce banned substances when you've turned the other way and known it's been part of an institution in baseball for a long time. And you have these harebrained half measures in the middle of the season, being reactive like you always are about everything. But if you look at what's happened in Omaha and you see the crowds there and you see SEC baseball in the South, there's still very much a thirst for baseball. And I do believe that. And I see Little League even in my community where, I tried to, my mom does daycare, as you know. Recently, I tried to go to one of her daycare kids' ball game about a month ago. The parking lot was completely full. I literally had nowhere to park, and I was getting ready to head to the ballpark an hour later, and I thought, I have nowhere to park.
This makes me happy to hear.
So
this.
My
These
point,
kids aren't playing lacrosse.
And look, that's not to say that baseball is fine. Let's be very clear about that. I'm saying baseball has a Major League Baseball problem much more than the idea that I think the sport itself is dead. I think, but in the case of looking at the Orioles specifically, and you look at the Diamondbacks, the Tigers have been in this category. The Pittsburgh Pirates have been this way for the better part of 30 years, give or take 3-4 years, which is, kind of where the Orioles are at this point, if you look at the same timeline. But, there is a lot of really compelling baseball out there. And this kind of brings me to what's been a shame in the sense that as not fun as it's been in Baltimore, it has been a really fun baseball season when you look at Shohei Ohtani and Fernando Tatis and what Vlad Guerrero's doing as an MVP caliber player, and what the San Francisco Giants have done, and Kevin Gausman figuring it out after not just not doing that with the Orioles, but a couple other teams he didn't figure it out. And, you see the Red Sox have a big series against the Yankees over the weekend, but yet we're seeing the Orioles get blown out on a nightly basis. I mean, at least they won a road game Friday night, but it's tough. And it is something that you do look to and say, I understand what they're trying to do. This isn't even saying that I think Mike Elias and Sig Mejdal don't know what they're doing or anything like that. But there is the sense to what you talked about. How do you get from point A to point B without doing too much catastrophic damage to a brand that, let's face it, a brand that has sustained a ton of damage going back to the mid 80s, let alone talking about since Peter Angelos bought the team in 1993. So there is that sense of, could you have done a little bit more? You have done a little more here and there to make this a little more palatable in the interim? I think that's a fair question. And again, as someone who was probably said it a little too flippantly as far as trading Mancini, at least have a conversation with the guy. And to your point, if he would be receptive and open to a 3-year deal, then hey, it's not my money and they're not spending money on anyone else. So, and let's be clear, despite how owners across professional sports, when you're in these rebuilding periods and you're saving money, they'll always say, oh, we'll pump those resources into future payrolls. We know that doesn't happen. So there is a sense of, I'm not going to sit here and say that
the beer's not discounted. I checked the tickets.
Right,
last week.
exactly. So as much as I would not in any way give him a 6-year deal, and I think that would be foolish, and that would be, kind of not learning from the Chris Davis mistake all over again. But if Trey Mancini's open to a 3-year deal and you want to give him more than what market would likely dictate as a bonus, a hazard pay bonus for remaining with the Orioles for another year or two, with the thought that on the other side of this, you got a chance to have some fun, and maybe you can be the Orioles version of what Ryan Zimmerman was for the Nationals a couple years ago as the elder statesman that gets to finally win a World Series, then have the conversation. But if he's ready to move on, and hey, he knows as well as anyone that life is short and your baseball life can be very short, that if he's ready to move on and wants to go to a contender, then I think you accommodate him, because I think, one, it makes sense for you long term as an organization, but two, I think he deserves that as well. So, we'll see how that plays out. And Trey said all the right things when he's been asked about it, so it's not like it hasn't been talked about. It'll be talked about, certainly. Home run derby, if he's going to take part there, and there'll be plenty of national reporters asking him questions. So we'll see how it plays out. But yeah, in the meantime, save for a few guys here and there, this is not very fun. And as much as I'll look forward to being back at the ballpark later on in July, I can't say that I'm going to miss it while I'm enjoying some pizza and some relaxation on the beach.
Something tragic happens. Luke Jones is Baltimore. Luke. He is Luke at WNST.net. You can find him out on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, anywhere. The Chicken Palooza is underway here beginning July 1st. We are doing the Crab Cake Tour. We're going to be with Barry Glassman up at Barrett's in Bel Air this week. For all of you up in Harford County, we're also going to be down in Anne Arundel County next week with Stuart Pittman. So putting some things together, the mayor of Baltimore, Brandon Scott, as well as Johnny O later on in the month. And then we begin the tour on August 1st in Ocean City, Maryland. I am Nestor. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore. We never stop talking baseball, saving the Orioles, and Baltimore positive.